Why did you come?" She said it while adjusting a plate on the table, without fully lifting her eyes. The sentence came out low, tired, as if my presence were an inconvenient detail in the middle of something more important. My body reacted before my mind. I felt a chill run up my arms, my stomach sinking slowly, as if the floor had dropped a few inches beneath me. I stood there, gripping my bag too tightly, waiting for someone to say something. Anything. Nothing happened. The sounds of the house went on as usual. Conversations, laughter in the background, the clinking of glasses. Only I had heard it. Only I had felt it. I didn't answer. Not because I lacked words, but because any response would have been wrong. If I apologized, I would confirm that I was where I shouldn't be. If I explained myself, I would seem defensive. If I asked why, I would be accused of ruining the mood. So I stayed silent. Silence has always been my safest language. It was her birthday. I had come because I always came. Because that was what one did. Because despite everything, there was still in me an old, almost childish expectation that my presence mattered. Or at least that it was welcome. Her question was not violent. It was precise. Like someone finally saying out loud something they had been thinking for a long time. It mattered, because it didn't surprise me. It hurt precisely because it confirmed something I had been avoiding naming. For years, I felt that I occupied a provisional space in her life, a space that could be removed without major consequences. Hearing it that day didn't break me immediately. It emptied me. And in the middle of that emptiness, a quiet question arose that I couldn't push away. What happens after you understand that your presence was never really wanted? In my family, there was always a clear emotional hierarchy, even though no one ever talked about it. My mother occupied the absolute center. Her mood defined the tone of the house. When she was well, everything felt lighter. When she was not, everyone had to adjust. I learned early to watch her closely, to read minimal signs, to anticipate needs before they were even expressed. My role formed gradually. I was the one who helped, the one who fixed things, the one who caused no trouble. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was adaptation. I discovered that if I was easy, if I didn't demand much, if I swallowed frustrations in silence, the environment stayed more stable. And stability felt like love. Affection was never completely absent. It was conditional. It appeared when I matched what was expected of me, when I was useful, when I didn't bring complicated feelings, when I didn't question. Over time, I learned to adjust my emotions the way one adjusts the volume of music so as not to bother anyone. I became good at it, good at knowing when to stay quiet, good at smiling without wanting to, good at turning exhaustion into efficiency. I came to believe that maturity was that. Enduring without complaining, understanding without being understood, being there without needing anything. Today, I see that it was emotional survival disguised as virtue. The first moment that stayed in my memory wasn't big, but it was definitive. I must have been a teenager when I tried to show something I had made. It wasn't extraordinary, but it was important to me. My mother glanced at it quickly and said, "Later." There was no later. That simple word taught me that what came from me could wait indefinitely. I learned then that my things had no urgency. After that, small situations began to accumulate. I spoke and was interrupted. I gave an opinion and it was ignored, until someone else said something similar and received attention. When I asked for help, a sigh came before the answer. When I showed sadness, the atmosphere became uncomfortable, as if I had brought something inappropriate into the room. Nothing was explicit enough to be confronted. There was always a possible explanation. "She's tired. She didn't mean it. You're taking it personally." And I believed it. Or at least I tried to. It was easier to think the problem was my sensitivity than to accept that there was something structurally wrong in the way I was treated. There was a day when I arrived exhausted, emotionally and physically. I hadn't planned to say anything, but something slipped out. I said carefully that I wasn't doing well. I didn't dramatize. I didn't cry. I just said I was tired of trying to handle everything. She listened for a few seconds and replied, "Everyone is tired." The conversation ended there. I felt small for having spoken, as if I had broken an invisible rule. After that, I began to police myself even more. I reduced expectations. I adjusted behaviors. I started entering environments already prepared not to be seen. That gave me a strange sense of control. If I expected nothing, I wouldn't be disappointed. If I asked for nothing, I wouldn't be rejected. I called that independence. Today I know it was defense. On the day of her birthday, I hesitated before leaving home. I thought about not going. I thought about making up an excuse, but something in me still believed that my absence would be noticed. I arrived early. I helped with what was needed. I avoided drawing attention. I was exactly who I had always been, until the moment she saw me there and sighed, asking why I had come. After that, everything continued normally for everyone else. No one noticed anything. I moved around the house with the feeling of being displaced inside my own body. Every laugh seemed distant. Every conversation reinforced the idea that I was there out of habit, not desire. From that day on, something changed silently. There was no formal decision, just a deep exhaustion. I stopped offering more than necessary. I stopped sharing personal things, not out of anger, but out of depletion. Guilt came right after. Guilt for feeling pain. Guilt for pulling away. Guilt for no longer being the same available person as before. I began to wonder if there was something essentially wrong with me. If I was difficult. If I demanded too much. Shame seeped into the details. In every conversation, I mentally reviewed what I had said. In every encounter, I evaluated whether my presence was being tolerated or desired. Little by little, I became emotionally numb. The breaking point didn't come in the form of a fight. It came as a simple thought on a quiet night. I realized that if I disappeared emotionally, my mother would not miss me as a person. She might miss the help, the availability, the function I performed, but not me. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with a strange calm, and that calm frightened me more than any explosion would have. I began to observe the pattern more clearly, not to accuse, but to understand. My constant adaptation had created a comfortable environment for others. My ability to swallow pain kept everything running. I had learned to exist as support, not as someone who also needed support. The consequences stayed entirely inside me. Withdrawal, constant doubt, shame for wanting to be seen, guilt for desiring something that was never offered spontaneously. Silence became a habit. Distance became protection. I withdrew emotionally even from myself, afraid to recognize the size of the absence. Over time, something began to shift. It wasn't healing. It wasn't liberation. It was awareness. I began to name what I had lived through, to understand that it wasn't exaggeration to feel pain in the face of repeated rejection, that it wasn't weakness to want care, that my presence didn't need to be justified. When I remember that question, "Why did you come?" it still hurts. But now it hurts from a different place. It reveals more about the emotional limits of the one who asked than about my worth. There was no apology. There was no reparative conversation. Just a silent understanding that some relationships cannot offer what we need. Today, I see how this erasure spread into other areas of my life, how I still apologize too much, how I still scan faces for approval before finishing a sentence. My body remembers before my mind. The tightness in my chest, the urge to retreat, the fear of taking up space. Even so, something changed. I began to protect parts of myself that I once offered without filters. Not out of revenge, but out of preservation. I learned to stay silent without immediately blaming myself. I learned to leave earlier. I learned not to explain so much. There was no official rupture. There was no farewell. There was only an internal change, silent, almost invisible to those looking from the outside. But decisive for me. I stopped measuring myself by her reaction. I stopped waiting for a gesture that never came. I stopped justifying my pain. Maybe she will never understand the impact of that question. Maybe she will never realize what was lost there. And for the first time, that is not something I need to fix. Some stories don't end with mutual understanding. They end with someone choosing not to erase themselves anymore. If you have ever been in a place where your presence felt like an inconvenience, you may recognize this silence, the feeling of arriving and not knowing if you should, of existing and still feeling out of place. This story does not end with clear answers. It continues in the slow process of learning to make yourself smaller no longer, even when no one notices.